The unstated objective is regime change. If they fail in that, you say, okay, you launched this war, you didn't achieve your objectives. Entire blocks of Tel Aviv have been obliterated. We've been shown to be, vulnerable. This was kind of the myth of Israel of Israeli invincibility has ended. And what did you achieve? Nothing. So you would have to say, even if that's the outcome, no clear military victory, the political victory goes to Iran. That's how I see it. But there are questions about, how much, let's say, covert capacity Israel still has within Iran.
Right. But do you really believe that covert capacity is really a great risk to Iran? Because like you said, I mean, if the goal is regime change to do what they did in Syria, it seems clear that we're having a rallying around the flag effect instead here in Iran. So it's almost the opposite thing. I think the likelihood of some type of revolution, overthrowing the Ayatollah, all this, I just think it's not there. I think because of the way that Israel conducted this Pearl Harbor-like attack,
right,
it has really unified Iran. So then you said that Israel itself admitted that it only has 10 to 12 days left of interceptors, and then it's out. And then at that point, then they can be struck at will by Hezbollah, by the Houthis. They can start sending in slower moving, cheap Shahed drones, and they won't get shot down. Like all of a sudden, they are completely exposed. And then this is the question: why would Iran stop? Why would they let up? They would want, Israel would have to make some type of concessions, and then Israel does not engage in diplomacy. Will Israel ever go to the table to talk to Iran and say, sorry, we really messed up. We need to stop this and we'll end the Gaza genocide? Of course they won't do that, right? So what's the only option they have? Keep on putting pressure on the United States. Yeah. And we're going to find out soon. If they're already running out of interceptors, this is it. The pressure is on now. This decision is going to have to be made soon before Israel's society just collapses and within a month or so.
Yeah, well, no, I don't disagree with anything you said right there. One thing I wanted to point out is that I think like the most accurate missiles and drones that Iran has, I think they're using very sparingly now because they are vulnerable to air defense. But you're right, if the air defense is gone, then they have these slower moving drones and cruise missiles that are extremely accurate and can do a great deal of damage. And those could start, come into play. One thing about drones, of course, is that they're much easier to hide. They don't need big launchers or anything. So if it turns into a drone war, the advantage definitely goes to Iran. But I think you're right. I can't see. That's the problem. I mean, again, Israel it's so fixated on, I think, again, on this you can say a policy but it's much more than that. It's this almost religious faith in military invincibility or maintaining that image. That's which drives so many of their actions. It's something that goes way, way back. I was just reading about, this was actually prior to the creation of Israel. There was a right-wing Zionist named Jabotinsky that wrote a book called The Wall of Iron. And it was just about the necessity of really crushing the Arabs, just to make it clear to the Arabs. I know that Iranians are not Arabs, but I think that his argument certainly extends to them. It's just that you have to crush them, you have to humiliate them, you have to deprive them of all hope of ever defeating you in a battle. And that's, I think, been always the policy of Israel. It's not diplomacy, it's not negotiation, not finding a way to live with your neighbors, but it is domination. It is instilling fear, in your neighbors, abject fear, the point where they don't dare to raise their heads or even think of striking you. And that has been the mindset of Israeli leaders for a long time. Certainly the mindset of of Netanyahu and his ruling coalition. So you're right; it's hard to see them actually submitting. What will they do? Well, I think we know right now what they're trying to do, and they always were going to try to do, and that is to bring the U.S. in to do the work for them. But if that fails, they'll probably succeed in that. But if that fails, then there is the nuclear question.
Right. Yeah, well, that's the big question. Will it fail? I felt like there was no chance that the U.S. would not go to war. It just felt like the way that Trump was talking, we were there. But I am delighted to see the pushback online. The past couple of days, I've been furiously liking every tweet that people are pointing out the hypocrisy whenever these politicians are saying we got to go to war, we got to go to war. It was great to see a lot of real, true America First people coming out and saying that this is not what we want. Jackson Hinkle ratioing everybody. It was great to see. So, that's what we have to do. We have to make our voices loud. And I think it's starting to break through. That initial coordinated wave of war propaganda was really scary, and it looked like we're going there. But now that we're seeing more and more people seeing beyond the veil and realizing that this is not in our interest, we do not want this war. Maybe it could stop him. I don't know. Maybe it can. That's
right. I think the risk is, I think that Trump, again, though he lacks sense and understanding in so many, areas of, especially geopolitics, he does have good political instincts, good domestic political instincts. That's why, he was twice elected president. And so if he's sensing that, this is going to be unpopular, that may stop him. That's a possibility. But what I'm afraid is that, again, these people around him, they know how to work him, and they'll say, Trump, this is going to be quick and clean, and we'll send in the B-2s once, we'll get the job done, and we're out of there. And those kind of quick and clean air wars, they're really popular, and that's all it's going to be. But then what if some of the B-2s get shot down, if it doesn't succeed, if the Iranians respond by hitting American bases or sinking an American ship, they're supposed to have Chinese ship killing missiles. So I'm sure other people are reminding him of that possibility. And maybe again, it's just, I don't want to put, any kind of, I'm never confident when it comes to Trump, and nobody should be. But I think it's clear that he has been, sensitive, aware of what plays well domestically, and that may put the brakes on him.
You mentioned us moving a lot of our assets into position, and the fear of a ship getting sunk. Well, I've been hearing rumors that the USS Nimitz could be a potential false flag, that this is an aging aircraft carrier, 50 years old, set to retire next year, and now it's being floated out in the middle of the sea to offer as a sacrifice so we can draw us into war with Iran. Do you believe that?
Well, I don't think so, but, anything's possible. A false flag is risky, though, because it can be exposed. And, especially when you have a very compliant media. Now, there have been obvious false flags and, similar kind of operations in Ukraine, and they just never get exposed. Like, the attacks on the Zaporozhye nuclear power plant, for ridiculous going on, like the Ukrainians would claim that the Russians are doing it themselves, bombing themselves. But you had such a compliant media that they covered for them, at least for months and months and months. But absent a completely compliant media, there's a danger that you can be exposed. That the incident can be exposed as a false flag, and we've already seen, like, for example, that CNN report, and there is a kind of a general cynicism about this. Americans are more cynical about these things, much more cynical than they were in, let's say, 2003. So it is a risky. It would be a risky move on the part of the U.S. government. I believe it would be. And then also, I can't remember who pointed this out, but it's just false flags are done usually when you are only when they, when you feel like you have no other alternative, you don't have, the support. You're not able to bring in the other country or whatever. But in this case, I think probably the Israelis are confident and the Americans, officials don't see a problem here, that they can do it. And maybe they do believe, it'll be quick and clean and all that. I don't think that they're that desperate yet. I think that we haven't reached that point. But, as you say, there is always a potential for a false flag, especially if on the part of Israel in particular, not so much the U.S., I would say, especially if Trump stays out of it and decides to keep the U.S. out of it and things continue to get worse for Israel, then they may become desperate and we could see anything happen.
Yeah, I mean, I think a false flag wouldn't be successful. I just feel like people are onto it. The jig is up. The jig is up for Israel. I think they can't get away with it this time. It's done. Do you agree? I mean, like, this was so brazen. Just the whole story of what's happened here, it's just been crazy. The whole history of Israel. And once people start to go down that rabbit hole, you just start to realize this. I mean, but even if we just take since October 7th, what Israel's been doing, just in Gaza and then in Lebanon and in the West Bank and then against the Houthis and now Iran, and just the fact that they also have nuclear weapons. They are not a signatory to the NPT, but they're demanding a country that is signatory to the NPT, that is submitted, done everything by the book, crossed all their T's, dotted all their I's, submits themselves to inspections. They are the ones that are a threat, even though Israel is the one that has nuclear weapons and is not a signatory to the NPT. It's just the whole premise of everything. And then they do a sneak attack in the middle of negotiations with the United States. Nothing about it could be the audacity for them to try to be able to spin it and say that we are the ones under attack and the United States now has to. It's the whole story. I feel like I'm living in some weird timeline. This whole thing doesn't make sense. And then what we're seeing, when all these politicians and billionaires, this is what's so great. What's happening now, this huge war propaganda push, is outing all the true traitors in this country who are actually Israeli firsters instead of America firsters, who is working for a foreign government. And we can see, wow, there's a lot of you. And we can see the ones that are reasonable. Marjorie Taylor Greene, AOC, Bernie Sanders. It's a bipartisan thing, but we see what happened. Now it's gone to the surface. Oh, this is it. These are the foreign agents in our country. Here they are. Ted Cruz, Trump. They're everywhere. They're unfortunately so many, and it's done. Right? The jig is up. Do you agree?
The lie is wearing thin. That's clear. The problem is the liars are still in power. And, you pointed to those brave members of Congress, that are speaking out against this on, both sides of the aisle, more power to them. But at the same time, let's not forget that the vast majority of Congress is still in the pockets of AIPAC. Let's not forget that, again, the mainstream media, there are the exceptions. I was talking about that CNN report. They're still fully aligned. Our government, the people that actually have the power to make the decisions. And the same thing you find, I think, definitely in Western Europe. Clearly this is just such a blatant lie. The justification for this attack on Iran just is completely absurd to anybody who knows anything. Yet we have people like Starmer and Mertz. And Mertz in particular has just been bloodthirsty and made all kinds of outrageous comments, providing their full unconditional support for Israel. And there's the establishment is still very much in their pocket. So it's not over, it's not over by a long shot. But I think you're right. Again, like what we've seen the poll, we've seen sort of, again, cracks appearing within the media. Their days are numbered. We'll just put it that way. Or maybe we should say their years are numbered, because it may still take some years before we see real change. But I think that whatever happens here, this is yet another blow to establishment credibility in the West.
Right. It's not over, but the jig is up. The thing is, okay, they still hold the reins of power, but people now know It's like you're watching a murder mystery, and you finally get towards the end of the movie, and you find out who the bad guy is. Well, okay, it's not over yet. We've got to catch the bad guy, but we know it. So this is the end of the movie. This is the last 15 minutes. We're going to get it, and then hopefully we get the celebration, happy ending at the end.
Right. Well, maybe to extend your analogy there, it's like you find out who the bad guy is. The problem is you also find out he has the support of the mayor and the chief of police. And so actually you still have many more episodes to go before you can bring him to justice.
So now, okay, the jig is up. So season 2, though, is going to be the battle against it, though. But the writing is on the wall. The government cannot stay, it needs to have the support of its people. And it's gone now. People are going to be looking at this in future elections. The question is going to be, are you taking money from AIPAC? Are you Israeli owned? And, we're going to see people like Thomas Massey become very popular, and hopefully we can have a Foreign Agent Registration Act that actually is doing its job and makes Israel register. I don't think they can. I think that's what's going to happen, right? This is going to be the central point moving forward in domestic elections.
Yeah, I don't know if it's going to be the central point. One thing is the thing that we focus on, but just think about, for example, we had all those demonstrations, against Trump, really, and his abuses of power or alleged abuses of power. I'm sure some of these allegations are true, but this is not really our area of competency. But we haven't seen any anti-war demonstrations. We haven't. There isn't the same kind of passion so far. I mean, it exists and it's growing. That's great. But most people still are really fixated on domestic politics. And unfortunately, so much of that is just completely polarized and very partisan in nature. So we do still have a ways to go. I mean, there's clearly, some glimmers of light and hope, and there's growing cynicism towards our foreign policy. These are all very positive trends, a growing understanding of the of the destructive role that Israel plays, both in our own politics and, of course, within the Middle East. These are all very positive and really should be encouraging trends, no question about it. But I think I think everything you said is right. I just think it's going to take more time. I hope I'm proven wrong. Sometimes, these changes happen faster than you can imagine. You're so used to, maybe it's a function of being older. I've seen this for such a long time. Yeah, now I'm seeing a real acceleration in criticism of Israel and so on. I admit there has been kind of an inflection point recently, but Israel has been there, and the Zionist establishment has been here, and it's just not going to go. I have trouble believing it's going to go away anytime soon. Maybe it's just my old guy prejudice, but I think it's going to be some years. And again, I hope that I'm proven wrong, and that your optimism is proven correct.
Yeah. Yeah, I hope you're wrong too, but you seem to be right more than me, so we'll find out. But I'm kind of surprised to see there's a lot of groundswell pushback against this war amongst the general population, but we're seeing so much of the elite, not just political elite, but are like industry elites, are just in silent or supportive of this. It's kind of surprising. Like, why I was expecting to see more. I mean, there's so many people in this elite class that hated Trump for everything. No matter what he did, it was the worst thing ever. And here he's truly doing something horrendous, just suicidal for the United States. And then you not a peep out of people like Hillary Clinton or Obama or Biden or the Bushes or people like Bill Gates or Zuckerberg, Elon Musk. Why everyone? They're just. Are they all part of this evil cabal too? Like, it's not just our politicians. It extends. We know the media, but it's just.
The problem is they're all on the they're all on the same team when it comes to foreign policy. That's the truth. There's a bipartisan foreign policy. The elite is in favor of U.S. led global hegemony and of Zionism, which is it's a separate thing, I think, a separate phenomenon, though I think they really do come together in the case of Iran, because Iran is part of that multipolar world. It's an important ally to both Russia and China. So both Zionism and kind of general the support for global hegemony, they come together in this one war, and they're all very much on the same team here. That's. I remember, I think it was Scott Horton, the Libertarian Institute, that pointed out, this was during Trump's first presidency, that it was like, of all the things that you could attack Trump for, and he agreed there are many things where Trump, would deserve very severe criticism, denunciation. But the one thing he did right is the one place where he was attacked. In other words, he was in favor of improving relations with Russia, and that became their point of attack. And that's just always been true. I just remember, again, and early on in his first presidency, he was being attacked for everything under the sun. Really viciously attacked by the liberal establishment. And then he bombed Syria, really without cause, and that all of a sudden they kind of stood at attention and saluted. And that's what we're seeing here. This is the worst thing that he's done so far, and yet they're on his team. I think that's everybody should remember that. Think of all those, like these demonstrations that were held recently, the No Kings demonstrations. I think it was Joe Loria of Consortium News pointed out that he could only see one sign that that brought up Palestine and Gaza and all those demonstrations. I'm sure there were more. There were very many, but it was minuscule. And in the European demonstrations, like in England, there's always a very strong, pro-Palestinian, anti-Zionist presence. It's it would be the mix in these kind of demonstrations. It's the liberal establishment in general is completely on board with these wars.